Hi everyone, and welcome to Hontora. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the place where we explore the darkest, most deeply unsettling, true horror stories the internet has to offer. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here. I need to tell you something before we start. There are stories I find and never open again, not because they're bad, but because some things work like doors. Once you've seen what's on the other side, that's it. Tonight I have 2 of those, and I've been sitting on them for weeks. Links are at the top of the description. 2 stories. The first will unsettle you in a way you can name. The second, I still can't explain it, and it's been living in my head since I found it alone at 1 a.m., wishing I hadn't. Some stories don't let go. This is one of them. Comments open the second it ends. First reaction, no filter. I read everyone. Lights off. Full attention. Let's go. Viewer discretion is advised. I run a small business, nothing glamorous, commercial landscaping, 12 employees, more spreadsheets than I ever expected when I started it at 26. The point is, I'm a problem solver by habit. Something breaks, I fix it. Something doesn't add up, I find the number that's wrong. I don't rattle easy and I don't spook. I need you to understand that before I tell you what happened, because otherwise none of it makes sense. Coming from me. The trip was my idea of a reset. 3 weeks of back-to-back contract bids and a payroll issue that nearly wrecked a Friday. I needed out. Threw my gear in the truck, picked a section of the Blue Ridge I'd camped in twice before, and drove. No itinerary, no check-in schedule. Just me, a reliable tent, and the specific kind of silence you can only find when you're 2 miles off any marked trail. I made camp late afternoon on a Saturday. Good site, flat ground, decent tree cover, a creek close enough to filter from, but far enough that the sound didn't keep me up. Temperature dropping the way it does in early October at that elevation, that clean cold that smells like wet bark and nothing else. I ate, hung my food bag, sat by a small fire for an hour, felt my shoulders come down for the first time in weeks. I was in the tent by 9, asleep by 9:15. The voice woke me up sometime after midnight. Not a shout, not close. It was distant enough that my half-asleep brain filed it under other camper and started drifting back down. But then it came again, and this time I was awake enough to catch something wrong with it. The cadence. It was flat. Perfectly mechanically flat. The same inflection on every syllable, like a GPS giving directions. Words I couldn't make out at that distance, but the rhythm of it sat wrong in my chest in a way I couldn't explain yet. I told myself it was a radio, somebody else's camp, bad signal, voices bleeding through static. Reasonable. I lay back down. It came a third time. Exactly the same rhythm, same duration, same flat affect. Radios don't repeat like that. I pulled on my boots and grabbed my headlamp, kept it off, and moved toward the sound, maybe 200 meters northeast, through a section of dense pine. I'm not proud of this decision in retrospect, but at the time it still felt like a solvable problem. Go find the source, identify it, come back to bed. What I found was a small clearing, and in the middle of it, zip-tied to a tree at about chest height, was a cheap, handheld radio with a portable battery pack wired to it, playing a recorded loop. The same flat voice, the same words, cycling on a 30-second interval. We know you're here. We know you're here. We know you're here. I stood there and looked at it for probably 10 seconds. Then I turned around and walked back to my camp. I'm not going to tell you I stayed calm because that would be a lie. But I stayed quiet, which is different and more useful. I was running through explanations, prank, some weird art installation, trail weirdos with a bad sense of humor, and discarding them one by one as my hands moved automatically, breaking down the tent, stuffing the sleeping bag, not using the headlamp. The fire was already down to coals. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, no area code I recognized. The message was 4 words. Don't use the light. I had not turned my headlamp on. I had not made a sound. Whoever sent that had been watching me in the dark for at least the last 10 minutes. I left everything I couldn't grab in 30 seconds. Sleeping pad, cook kit, the camp chair I'd had for 8 years. I picked up my pack, my keys, and moved south toward the trail, staying off the path itself, parallel to it through the brush, moving as quietly as I've ever moved in my life. Every 20 steps, I stopped and listened. What I heard twice was movement, not animals. Animals don't stop when you stop. There were at least 2 of them, spread out. That's the part that got into me. Not the radio, not the text, but the spacing of the sounds. Deliberate, like they'd done this before and knew to cover ground on both sides. I made the trailhead in 40 minutes, got in the truck, locked it, drove until I hit a gas station with lights and other people, and sat in the parking lot, shaking in a way I couldn't control for about 15 minutes. I filed a report the next morning. The deputy who took it was professional, didn't dismiss me, asked the right questions. They sent someone out, found the radio setup, photographed it, bagged it, ran the battery pack for prints. The phone number that texted me was a burner, activated 2 days before, never used again after that night. They found boot prints, multiple sets, different sizes. Nobody was ever identified. The case is technically still open, though I doubt anyone's actively working it. The Ranger District put out an advisory about suspicious activity in that corridor, which I only know because a friend who hikes that area sent it to me 3 months later with a question mark. I still camp. Took me about a year to get back out, and I go with other people now, which I used to think was unnecessary. I tell myself the important thing is that nothing actually happened, that I got out, that it stayed in the category of a bad night rather than something worse. But sometimes I think about the spacing of those sounds in the dark, the way they were positioned on both sides of the path, how that's not something you do by instinct, that's something you practice. I'm not the kind of person who tells stories like this. I'm an engineer. I troubleshoot systems for a living, HVAC, building infrastructure, the kind of work where everything has a cause and the cause always has a fix. I don't do well with things that don't have fixes. I need that context up front because what I'm about to tell you, I've been sitting on it for almost a year and I still don't have a fix for it. October 2024, I'd just come off a 14-week project that had genuinely broken something in me. Not dramatic, just the slow kind of broken where you stop sleeping right and start snapping at people you like. My wife said take a week, go somewhere without signal. So I rented a cabin through one of those private listing sites, a place in the Smokies, maybe 40 minutes off the main tourist routes. No neighbors visible from the porch, a wood stove, a creek somewhere downhill that you could hear at night. Exactly what I needed. The drive up was fine, the cabin was fine, small, clean, smelled like cedar and old ash from the fireplace. I got there on a Sunday, unpacked maybe a third of what I brought, made coffee and sat on the porch until it got too cold. Then I went inside and slept for 10 hours straight. First real sleep in months. The first 3 nights were completely normal. I want to be clear about that because it matters. Nothing happened. I hiked during the day, cooked simple meals, read a book I'd been carrying around half finished for 2 years. The woods around the cabin were quiet, the way mountains are quiet and full of small sounds, wind and birds and the creek, but underneath all of it a stillness that doesn't exist at lower elevations. I felt genuinely okay for the first time in a long time. Night 4, I woke up at 4:03 a.m. No sound I could identify, no bad dream. Just awake, the way I'd been waking up at the cabin in the backcountry story, suddenly and completely like a switch. I lay there in the dark and listened. The creek, wind in the tree line, and then something else. It's hard to describe without it sounding like more than it was. It wasn't a voice exactly, not at first. More like the shape of a voice, the frequency of someone calling out, but with the actual words just below what I could resolve. The way you'll sometimes hear music from another room and can't quite make out the song, but you know it's music. I lay there for maybe 10 minutes. It didn't repeat. I told myself it was the wind doing something with the terrain. There's a ridge behind the cabin that I figured was probably creating some kind of acoustic effect. I've worked in buildings long enough to know that airflow does genuinely strange things in enclosed spaces. Mountains aren't that different. I went back to sleep. Night 5. 4 a.m. exactly. Same thing, but louder. And this time I could almost make out the shape of a word at the end of it. One syllable, rising at the end like a question or a name. I sat up. Didn't turn on a light, I don't know why, just sat there in the dark and listened and felt my pulse, doing something it hadn't done in a long time, and not racing, just present. That specific kind of aware. It came again, closer, and this time I heard it, clear enough that my brain pattern matched it before I consciously processed it. The way you'll recognize a face before you remember the name. It sounded like my brother who lives in Columbus, Ohio, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 days, who had absolutely no idea where this cabin was because I'd booked it on a whim and hadn't told anyone the exact address. His voice, his specific cadence, the way he says my name when he's about to ask me something he thinks I'll say no to. I got out of bed. I want to be honest about that. I walked to the front window and looked out at the porch and the dark tree line beyond it, and I genuinely almost opened the door. That's what scares me most, looking back. Not what happened next. The fact that I almost went out there. I didn't. Something stopped me. Not fear, exactly. More like the engineering instinct. This doesn't add up. Don't touch it until you know why. I stood at the window and I said louder than I meant to, "Who's out there?" Silence. The creek. The wind. Then, "Don't you remember me?" Same voice, same cadence, but the words were wrong. My brother would never say that. Nobody who actually knew me would phrase it that way. It was the voice with the wrong software running underneath it. Close enough to fool you for a second. Not close enough to hold up. I stepped back from the window. Didn't turn on the lights. Some part of me didn't want whatever was outside to know exactly where I was standing. I went to the back of the cabin, sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame, and stayed there until I saw gray light starting to come in around the curtains. Packed in 20 minutes. Didn't shower, didn't make coffee. Just put things in the bag in the order they came to hand and put the bag in the car and left. I called my brother from the highway. He picked up on the second ring, confused, still half asleep. He'd been home all night. His wife confirmed it. I told him I'd explain later and hung up and drove the rest of the way home without stopping. I reported it to the county sheriff's office 2 days later, once I'd had enough sleep to put a coherent account together. Gave them the dates, the times, the location. A deputy called me back the following week, said they'd had a patrol go by the area, found nothing unusual, no signs of camp, no tracks they could definitively attribute to a person, nothing left behind. He was professional about it, didn't dismiss it, but there was nothing to act on. I looked into the rental property after that, checked public records, asked the listing platform about prior guest reviews. Nothing notable. A few mentions of wildlife, one review that said the area felt remote in a way that took getting used to. That's it. I haven't been back to that part of the mountains. I probably won't. What I keep coming back to isn't the voice or even the words. It's the moment at the window when I almost opened the door. That's the part I can't engineer my way around. Because whatever was out there knew enough, just enough, to almost work. And I wonder sometimes how many times it had practiced before it got to me.